Hi everyone, this is Miss Brubeck. This is notes on how to evaluate functions. So I'm just going to go through the Jamboard and take you through it. As you should remember from our last set of notes, we learned that functions are math relationships, maybe a table or a graph or a set of points where every input has exactly one output. And there's also a special notation. Notation is just the way we write things, but there's a special notation for functions, and we write it like this. And it's pronounced f of x. So we write f with a parenthesis x, and it's pronounced f of x. And it's the same thing as writing y. So here, if you look, you see we have f of x equals 2x. That's the same thing as writing y equals 2x. F of x is just a fancy way of saying y. So you are used to using x and y throughout, your previous years of math. But when we're talking about functions, we use f of x. If I'm going too fast, just pause the video because I'm going to keep moving along. So when we're writing a function, like I said, we use f of x. Equations are what you're used to. You're used to equations where you have a y and an x. A function is exactly the same thing, but instead of writing y, we're going to write f of x. So instead of y equals 5x, it's going to be f of x equals 5x. Instead of y equals x plus 7, it's going to be f of x equals x plus 7. It means the exact same thing. F of x is the same thing as y. This is just showing us that it's a function. We're just writing f of x instead of y. And just as a reminder, f of x is just a fancy way of writing y. Okay? So again, if I'm going too fast, pause the video. Moving on to the next slide. I'm going to show you how to evaluate a function. It's very similar to how to evaluate an equation. It's actually basically identical. We learned how to evaluate equations back in September, and so all we're doing here is we know x equals 4. They're telling us that x equals 4. Because they're telling us that, that means we can plug in the 4 for the x. So we have y equals 2x, but we can rewrite it wherever you see an x, replace it with a 4. Wherever you see an x, replace it with a 4. And then when you have two x next to each other like that, that just means multiplication. So it's just 2 times 4, which is 8. All right, so that's your answer there. When we evaluate functions, we're doing the same thing, but instead of saying y, we're using f of x. So down here, same idea. We're going to plug in this x, this 4. We're going to plug in 4 in for x. But this time, we're using the f of x. So we're still going to plug in 4 like we did before. And our answer is going to be 8. But now we're just saying f of x equals 8. Okay? And I want to point out, y equals 8 is the same as writing f of x equals 8. They are giving you the same information. Okay? That's the same thing. Y equals 8 is the same thing as writing f of x equals 8. Again, I'm going to move on to the next slide, so if you need more time on this slide, go ahead and pause it. Pause the video. So here we're going to learn how to evaluate functions. So when we're evaluating functions, sometimes we know what x is equal to. So here it says, given the function f of x equals 3x plus 4, what is f of 2? So normally we would write it as f of x like that. But as you can see above, we've written it like f of 2. Basically what we've done is we've inputted the 2. We've inputted a 2 into our function. Okay, and we replaced the x with a 2. We had an x there, but now we have a 2. So this is like saying x equals 2. Okay, it's like saying x equals 2. So wherever we see a x in our function, we're going to replace it with a 2. So here's our original function from above. And wherever we see an x, we're going to replace it with a 2 because we know that x is 2. We already determined that. Now the part on the left, that's just going to stay the same. Think of that as saying y equals. I like to go ahead and write it a couple times just so I don't accidentally try to I don't get it confused with what's on the right. The left side, pretend f of 2 is like saying y equals. And all you're doing is trying to solve or simplify this part. So you're going to do 3 times 2 first, which is 6, because when we're doing the PEMDAS, we always do multiplication first, and then we just add the 6 and the 4, and that's 10. So what we're saying there is our input is the 2. So what happens is when you input 2, your output is then 10. That's what we're saying here. When you input 2, your output is 10. Okay, or another way of thinking about this was that when x equals 2, y equals 10. That's what this is telling us. Okay, so our input is 2, our output is 10. If we had a function machine and we input 2 into the machine and we get out 10, that's what we mean by that. Okay, so we'll do the same thing over here. Normally you would have f of x, but we have f of -1, so that means x is -1. So we're going to take this right here, and wherever we see, sorry, I'm struggling with the typing part. Wherever we see an x, we're going to replace that x with a -1. Now be careful, the 5 is negative here. So we're just replacing that with a -1. And I'm going to go ahead and write this -1 here a couple times. Okay. And so we're going to multiply first. -5 times -1 is a +5. And when you add that, when you add 5 and 2, you get 7. So again here, our input is the -1. And our output is the 7. That's what we're saying here. So if you had a function machine and you inputted the -1 into it, then you'd get out a 7. So we're also saying when x equals -1, y equals 7. That's the same thing. All right, if I'm going too fast, feel free to pause the video because I'm moving on to the next slide. These problems are all the same, but now you're going to see a G. And that sometimes you're going to see F, sometimes you're going to see G, maybe you're going to see H. It's just a way of naming the functions. So these functions they're going to be called G. All right, and we're going to do the same thing. We've got G of 6. So we're going to take our function and the same thing as what we did before. Wherever you see an X, replace it with a 6. And if you're like, well, where did I get the 6 from? We got the 6 from right here. And then again, just like before, we're not going to mess with the part on the left. The part on the left is just our function notation. It's like saying y equals, and we just simplify. We do multiplication first. 2 times 6 is 12, and then we add the 2 and we get 14. And that is our answer right here. All right, on to the next one. I know I'm going fast, but it's because I don't want to make the video too long. So again, we have g of x equals 3x plus 4. This time it's g of 10, so our input is 10. So wherever we see an x, we're going to input a 10. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and write my g of 10 here, treat it like it's a y. And then I'm just going to simplify. 3 times 10 is 30. We add 4, and 30 plus 4 is 34. And that is our answer. Again, if I'm going too fast, go ahead and pause the video because I am going to move on to the next slide. Now, the next slide looks different. Before we had problems that looked like f of 18. But this one says f of x equals 18. They're different. So what this is saying is that y is 18. Before they were giving us the input, now they're giving us the output, okay? Before they were giving us the input, now they're giving us the output. So it says here that f of x equals 18. Well, that means up here in our function where we see f of x, we can replace that with an 18. So notice how it looks different. The previous problem, you had the number inside the parenthesis, that's your input. This problem, we have the number outside the equal sign because it's our output. And so to do this, it's going to be a little bit different. You know, here's our original function, but this time, instead of replacing the x's with 18, we're going to replace the f of x with 18. And we're doing that because up here it says f of x equals 18, so we're putting that in, the 18 in for f of x. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Ms. Brubeck, I have literally no idea what to do next. Well, now you have an equation. This is just a regular equation, and you can solve this equation for x. So we can just subtract the 2 from both sides to get the x by itself. 18 minus 2 is going to be 16. We're going to bring down our 2x. And then the 2 minus 2, that's 0. So that just crosses out. Now we have 16 equals 2x. We can divide that. And so we divide both sides by 2. Oops. And that's going to get us 8 equals x. And that's your answer. So in this case, they had given you what y is. They gave you the output was 8. They told you it was 18. And you had to find what the input, the x is. Right? We'll do the same thing for the next problem. So again, for the next problem, f of x equals 39. So that means we're going to plug in 39 in here for f of x. So when we do that, we're going to have f of x equals 7x plus 4. And then instead of f of x, we're going to write 39 equals 7x plus 4. And we're again going to solve the equation for x. I'm actually going to move this over. I feel like it's a little too close. So we're going to solve it for x. To do that, we want to subtract the 4 from both sides. And that's going to be 39 minus 4, that's 35. And we're going to bring down our 7x. And then notice how on the right side, 4 minus 4, that's 0, so it crosses out. Now, to solve for x, we want to divide both sides by 7. So I'm going to divide both sides by 7. And that's going to get me 5 equals x. So our final answer is x equals 5. So these problems aren't terribly challenging. You know how to do all these math skills, but it's about like understanding the function notation and getting used to plugging the information in. I'm going to move to the next slide, so if you need more time on this, go ahead and pause the video. These problems are exactly the same. We're just practicing with different numbers. So again, we're going to plug in, it says g of x this time. It says g of x, but it's okay, we do it the same as before. And because it's telling us g of x is 18, then that means we're going to plug in the g of x for, we're going to plug in the, sorry, the 18. We're going to plug in the 18 for the g of x. The 18 is our output. We need to find our input. Okay, so we're going to once again solve for x. We're going to once again solve for x. So to do that, this is a minus 2. So because it's a minus 2, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to add 2 to both sides. Okay, because it's a minus 2, that means we're going to add 2 to both sides. When we do that, we're going to get 20 equals 4x, because we're going to bring down the 4x. And then negative 2 plus 2, that's 0. Okay. Our last step to get the x by itself is we're going to divide by 4. And so 20 divided by 4 is 5. So 5 equals x. And that's our final answer. All right. The next one, you can work out the next one on your own. Just know that you're going to be plugging in that 25 for g of x. I want you to try that last one on your own.